Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. You ever see this before? Well, if you watched our show last time, this is the tambour for our roll-top desk. I'll show you how to make a tambour top, how to make the cubbies, and how to make the drawers to complete our roll-top desk project. That's next, right here on the New Yankee Workshop. In the last episode, we built the two drawer cases, which are identical. There's a panel on each side, a panel at the back, and the pieces are joined together by these interior frames. We also made a panel at the back of the knee hole. In all, there are 7 panels on the base, and they're all constructed using the same techniques. 1/4-inch panels that fit into grooves. The rails and stiles are joined with tenons. After we made those panels, we made the top. A piece of plywood, edge banded with solid oak, and then a nice detail milled on the edge. I also made the top of the upper case. This is solid oak with the same kind of detail as the desk top. We also made the sides of the upper case, these panels. They're flat panel on the outside, raised panel on the inside, and there's a groove into which the tambour will run. Now over here on the workbench, I have another panel, which is the back of the upper case. Again, the construction techniques are the same as those that I used on the drawer cases. It's been in the clamps for a while. Now we're ready to take it out and sand it. Well, before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Using my stacked dado head cutter set up for a 1/4-inch width, a sacrificial strip on my fence, I've just milled a tongue on the edge of that back panel that'll fit into the side. Okay, let's check the fit. That's good. Now you notice that I rounded over the top edge of this S-curve up to this point right here, and also I rounded the back edge. Let me show you how I did that. A 3/8-inch radius router bit is all that I need to ease the edges. Now let's connect the back to the sides with a little bit of glue and some clamps. With the top carefully positioned on the side pieces, I'm going to drill and counterbore for some screws. Here I'm using my 3/8-inch plug cutter and a scrap of oak to make some plugs to fill the counterbores. Now I'm ready to start making the tambour, that curved piece, the closure for the top of the desk. I start out by taking some oak and planing it down to 13/16 inches thick. Then I joint one edge so that it's perfectly straight and square. I've now set up my router table with a 3/8-inch radius bit. I'll make one pass, flip it over, make another pass, and that'll give me the half round that I want for each tambour piece. I want to keep the pieces of tambour in order as I assemble the piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a line on the end of the stick. And I'll keep all these lines on the same side of the tambour. I'm also going to number the pieces so they're in the right sequence. After ripping each slat, it's back to the joiner to true up the edge. And now it's back to the router. And we keep repeating the process until I get 29 pieces. Here are all the slats that I'll need, taped together so that I don't lose the sequence. And this piece right here is going to be the lift rail, and there's a couple machining steps that I have to do to that. First is I want to bevel the top edge at 10 degrees. Now with a 3/8" radius bit raised above the table, I'm going to round over the downhill side of the bevel. The lift rail needs a tenon on each end, which will ride in the slot for the tambour. I can make that with a couple setups at the table saw. With the rip fence pulled back so there'll be no kickback as I push the piece through the blade, and the blade raised to 3/16 inch, I'll nibble away the material on each face. Now I've raised the blade to a 1/2 inch, and I'll nibble away the material at the top and bottom edge. Now with my rasp, I'm just doing a little bit of shaping to make sure that the tenon will ride smoothly through the groove. For this next operation, I want to make sure that I have plenty of good ventilation in the shop. We're going to stick the slats to the backing. The backing is nothing more than artist canvas that we picked up at the art supply store. Instead of using a traditional carpenter's glue, I'm going to use contact cement. I'm going to apply 2 coats to the canvas, letting the first coat dry before the second goes on, and I'll do the same thing to the back of the slats. The canvas has had 2 coats of contact cement, and it's sitting on a piece of plywood. It's just about ready for the next step. On the plywood there is one straight edge that I've secured with some screws. I've held it back from the canvas about 3/4 inch. I don't want canvas on the tambour where it rides in the slot. Now what I want to do is secure another piece that's perfectly square. So I'll just attach that with some screws. Okay. Now I'm going to take another cleat and just stretch the canvas. The test to see if it's ready to bond the pieces together is just to touch it. If it doesn't come off on your hand and it's tacky, we're ready. One of the advantages to using the contact cement is that I won't need any clamping to secure these pieces to the canvas. I'll bring the piece up against my end cleat and against the bottom cleat, drop it onto the canvas, and then take a J-roller and just apply some pressure to make sure I've got a good bond. Once the lift rail is in, we start with the slats. Let me just check my numbers to make sure we got the right sequence. Again, up against the straight edge, up against the lift rail. Another thing that I like to do is take a block of wood and just tap on the slats to make sure they're not bound up on the edges. All right, that's not going to go anywhere. Now I want to cut the canvas away from the plywood form. I don't want it stuck to the form. Let's see if we can get it away from the plywood. Okay, I'm going to take off the masking tape and slip it into the frame. Now one last thing before I try to slide this into the case. I found that when I built the prototype, if any glue got between the slats, they bound up. So I'm just trying to break them loose. These seem pretty good. Okay, this is a little tricky. I got to get it into both slots. and try to keep it square to the case as I feed it in. Okay. That's great. We'll set this aside to dry and start working on some drawers. The drawer fronts for the desk are just flat oak, sized to just be slightly smaller than the opening. The bottom drawers are double drawers. I'm going to be using those for filing. So what I've done is taken two drawer fronts and joined them with a fake rail. To make that assembly, all I have to do is take two drawer fronts, the rail, and cut some biscuit slots and then glue them up. We'll set this aside to dry, and we'll make the rest of the parts. The sides and back of the drawers are made up of a 1/2-inch thick cabinet-grade plywood. This first setup is to plow out a dado along the back edge to receive the back of the drawer. Now I've changed the setup. I reduced the dado to a 1/4 inch in width. I'm now going to plow a groove in the side for the plywood bottom and also in the drawer front. I'm going to join the drawer sides to the drawer front with half-blind dovetails. To make the dovetails, I'm going to use my dovetailing jig. I clamp the side piece in the jig. I've adjusted these fingers for the dovetail layout that I want. It can be any spacing that I want. I'm going to use my router, which is set up with a small collar and a dovetailing bit. The collar follows the fingers, the bit does the work. After a couple adjustments and installing the drawer front in the top of the jig, I flip the fingers over, slide it in, and set it on the thickness of the sides, which is a 1/2 inch. And then I route out the pins in the drawer front. This jig sure makes it easy. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's assemble one. Now these drawers are going to take quite a beating, especially these big ones. They're going to be loaded up with a lot of heavy stuff, going to be opened and closed frequently, and that's why this dovetail joint is a perfect choice. There's a lot of glue surface area, but most importantly, the shape of the joint makes it impossible to pull the front off when the drawer is opened. Okay, now I'll just run a bead of glue down that dado for the back. We'll slip that in and secure it with a few brads. Now for the 1/4 inch plywood bottom. No glue here, just slides in the groove. Turn it back over. Check the diagonal measurements to see if it's square. That's 29. That's good. And I'll tack it with a few brads along the back. I'm getting started today working on the pull-out shelves for the desk. They fit in this slot right here. Gives you some more additional work space. Just a piece of plywood and some oak banding. And the first step is to cut some slots for biscuits to join the pieces together. We noticed that on a lot of the antique originals, these pull-out shelves were made up of glued-up boards with breadboard edges. And they often would separate because of the expansion and contraction. Hopefully this plywood will solve that problem. Now that I've got the side pieces clamped in place, I'm going to cut a biscuit slot that'll bridge that side piece, helping hold it all together when it's assembled. The last few minutes I've been working on stock to build the cubby holes, and for that I want thin stock, about 1/4 of an inch thick. I resawed pieces out of thicker material on the resaw, just like I did with the lower panels for the case. Then I ran it through my surface planer. I don't know how you do this without a surface planer. You either have to have someone mill it up for you, or you have to find a friend with a planer. I brought out the cubby assembly from the prototype so I can show you what we're trying to build here. You can't have a roll-top desk without this nest of cubby holes, or sometimes called pigeonholes. Now the pieces are connected with either dado joints or rabbet joints, and I'll make those cuts at the table saw with a stacked dado cutter. Now I'm just dry fitting all the pieces together to make sure they line up. Now I've gone just to my saw blade. I'm making very shallow cuts, about 1/16 of an inch deep, and those will be for the vertical partitions, which are only 1/8 of an inch wide. These are the sides of the cubby, and I've clipped the back corner to accommodate the rolling tambour cover. With the saw set at 45 degrees, I've beveled the back edge of the top of the cubby assembly to accommodate that clip. I've also beveled the top edge of the back of the cubby assembly. And this is a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. I'm using plywood instead of solid material because it won't come and go. It'll be much stronger for the assembly. Now for a little assembly. I'm just going to use a little bit of white glue and brads. It would be a lot easier to build this assembly if these pieces were 3/8 of an inch or even thicker, but these thin lines make the piece much more elegant. The minimum thickness that I can get out of my surface planer is 1/4 of an inch. The vertical partitions in the cubby holes are 1/8 of an inch thick. To get that material down to the right thickness, I'm using this sanding machine. There are 2 belts. A coarse belt starts the sanding, a finer one smooths it up, and a large belt down here moves the material through the sand. Okay, that should do it. Now, the vertical partitions just get slid in place, no glue. This is an intermediate shelf that I'm just nailing to a couple of the verticals. Not much room for error here. All right, that takes care of that. Let's build a couple drawers. The little drawer couldn't be simpler. The grooves in the sides are just like the large drawers. It's joined to the drawer front with a simple rabbet joint. No need for a dovetail on a drawer this small. Okay, let's make some handles for the lower drawers. Here I'm using a vertical panel raising bit to start forming the profile of our handles. For this next operation, I've tipped my table saw to 9 degrees, moved the fence to the left side of the blade, and installed a sacrificial strip, and just beveled my blank. With the saw back to 90 degrees, I'm going to place that beveled face on the table saw surface and make a cut that's square to that bevel. Now running the piece vertically through the saw, I've just removed the excess material at the bottom edge. With my 3/8" radius roundover bit in the router table, I'm able to round over the top edge of each handle. A final pass with the 3/8" bit at the bottom corner finishes off the profile. We need 8 of these. We'll just cut them to length. Here I've scribed the profile on the ends of each handle, and I'm just cutting it out. Now we'll just clean them up on my oscillating spindle sander. To make a finger hole in the bottom of the pull, I'm using my 1/2" radius coving bit. I've also installed this stop block because if I was to try to bring it into the bit, it wants to shoot back. That prevents that from happening. I run it into the bit and bring it up to this layout line, and it gives me just the right slot. To install the handles on the draw fronts, I made this little template so that I don't have to measure for every single one. Once the template is set in place, I just apply a little bit of glue to the back of the handle, set it in place, and attach it with a couple 1" brads. To ease the remaining corners of each tray, I'm just using a portion of my 1/4" radius bit. To make a small finger hole to pull the tray out, I'm using a 1/2" round nose bit set up right on the split of my fence. I drop it down on my layout mark, go to the second layout mark, and remove the piece. Okay, those are going to work good. Now one more element on the tambour top. I have to put these 2 little strips on the lift rail so that I'll be able to grab it when it's closed. All I'm going to use there is some glue and some brads. For the finish on our roll top desk, we're going to use a polyurethane because I want a tough finish. Now the polyurethane that I'm using is a wipe-on poly. It'll give me the protection that I want, but it'll also give me sort of a hand-rubbed look. So all I use is a clean rag to apply the polyurethane, nice even coat, and I'll let it dry for 3 or 4 hours. Once the poly is dry, I just take some very fine steel wool and go over the surface. That'll get rid of any roughness from maybe dust that would have fallen on the piece. Once it's all steel wooled, I use a tack cloth to remove any loose dust, and then I'll apply another coat of the polyurethane in the same method. Well, 2 coats look pretty good, but 3 are going to look even better. Well, here it is with 3 coats of polyurethane. Now, undoubtedly, it'll get a little bit darker over the years, but this desk will be good for maybe 100 years of use. I now have a safe place to keep the important documents, and I can pigeonhole anything or anybody that happens to come by the shop. So until next time, I'm Norm Abram for the New Yankee Workshop.